And lo and behold, there was just one version of the fundraising letter with just a slight word change that ended up having a huge dramatic effect, right? And in this case, right, we've been kind of talking about this around a little bit. It was measurable.
Yeah.
In this case, the dollars.
Okay, next is the new intro for ID Tag.
ID tag?
It's an acronym, IDTAG. Doesn't take a genius.
Oh, right, those two Midwestern guys that don't pay me anything.
Yeah, it's a freebie.
Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome again to It Doesn't Take a Genius, conversation with introspective perspectives and pithy points of view. Here are your hosts, my friends, Max and Marty.
I think that's Mark and Mike.
Yeah, whatever.
Ramsey!
Do you know somebody saw me in a building this week and yelled that out? So thanks, Mike.
Your catchphrase, it's catching on. The Fonz had a.
And I have other people yelling my name. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it could be worse.
It used to be worse. I grew up in the era of Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, so that's what I heard often. And the response to that had to be, "I can't feel it, baby." Like that was my catchphrase for a while, which is just not a good catchphrase. Just not good. Anyway.
No. Yeah, everybody in college thought Marshall was my first name.
Yeah.
They didn't know my name. They just all called me Marshall. And then it was like at graduation, we were all standing around and they're like, "Dude, I heard your name and Marshall's not your first name." Huh? Yeah. It's like Prince, Cher, Rambo, Marshall.
Oh, I love it. Hey, we're talking about continuous improvement, having a culture of continuous improvement. We have covered, quite a bit of ground if you go back and look, sort of what this culture looks like of, being better at being better, as Seth Godin calls it. We've talked about having a vision for it. We've talked about having values clarified for it so you sort of know what you're going for. We've talked about coming up with the ideas. We've talked about filtering those ideas around priorities, which often involve vision and values. So we've covered a lot of ground, but we have a few more things that we think are worth bringing up, and today is one of them. And I think it's something that it seems like it shouldn't be an episode because when I just say it, it's going to be like, well, yeah, obviously. So I'll just go ahead and say it. But trust me, this is a full episode. So, Mike, let's talk about experimenting responsibly. Responsibly.
Yeah, As soon as I read that, I immediately thought of I had this friend in high school that made bad choices. And one of his sayings was, "I don't experiment with drugs. I know exactly what I need."
That's awful.
This is not good. Yeah, this is not right. But yeah, experiment responsibly. In this case, the idea of be better at being better, and the idea that we've got all these ideas, all right, and now we've filtered it down, and we've got all right. This is the one that we really would like to go with, or maybe there's one or two that we'd really like to go with.
Yeah.
What do you do now not to derail this thing and to create a culture where people know it's safe to move forward with an idea?
Yeah, well said. And obviously, like, this is something that's probably ingrained a little bit in your values that, we're going to improve, right? We're going to do things that make us growth oriented. That's great. So hopefully it's safe enough that some of these ideas percolate and as we talked about, sort of having an idea bucket with a tap that these ideas keep flowing into headquarters and you prioritize them and pick out a couple. But so now the proof's in the pudding. We need to do something with that. So one of the things that you and I have done in the past is we have gotten the privilege of taking a course from IDEO, the great industrial design firm out in California that, you probably have an IDEO designed product in your workplace and in your house as we speak would be my guess. Toothpaste tubes, Nike shoes, Apple computers. I mean, they've designed all sorts of things and designed processes and layouts of buildings and campuses and all sorts of things. They've touched just all sorts of things in what they call human-centered design. And one of those principles is this idea of a pilot and starting sort of starting small with a pilot. I think you had some thoughts on that, right?
Oh yeah. This has been my go-to for many years. Right. We have an idea session. We want to get better at being better. We narrow down an idea or two, and then you have to sell it up.
Yeah.
Right. The idea of managing up. All right. I got to get somebody to bless my idea to allow it to move forward. And when you tell somebody, especially in organizations where things are going well, right? All the organizations we deal with, they're making money, they're profitable, things are going well. And the idea of, can we get better is a little scary to folks who are risk averse.
Yeah.
So the idea of, hey, we got this idea, can we pilot it?
Right.
And by pilot it, right, we're going to focus on maybe one department. I've done it as small as like, okay, a couple of people. Let me take 2 people and we'll have them do this process, implement this change. And then the other piece that sells it is we're going to do it for a limited scope of time.
Yep.
All right. So give me 2 people and then you have to, you kind of have to, think through and think, all right, how long would it take if this idea works for it to have meaningful, measurable results?
Yep.
And you think, okay, I think in 60 days, 2 people, if they did this, I'd be able to show, right, here's the before data, here's the after data. This thing might be worth taking to a larger scale.
Right.
And so can I pilot it? Can we try it on a small scale for a limited amount of time? And when you do that, it creates safety.
Right.
The whoever's you're trying to either get to do this thing, even the 2 navigators, the 2 people who are your champions for this as far as the change goes. It even gives them some safety, because a lot of times people think, all right, if you change something, it's going to instantly be this way forever.
Right.
In perpetuity will always, it's like, no, we're going to try it, have a date for when the trial ends, have data to look at. It's going to be okay. And if it's awful and it doesn't work, we'll stop.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's okay. Now people go, okay, that feels a little better. Right, I can get on board with the 90-day pilot with a couple of people.
And if you think of it, really pilot and experiment is kind of the same thing. And so you can think of the concept of a pilot project as really the overarching theme of this entire episode. And I'll give an example. Google has their 20% rule. What that means is 20% of the time they're expecting employees could spend that much of their work week on a passion project. And so what that's saying is that 80% of the time we're going to be doing the gig, but we think it's worth experimenting with this 20% of the time to figure out what we do with it. And if you don't mind, I've got a quote from their original, they called it an owner's manual for Google shareholders. It's their IPO letter, the founder's IPO letter. So this is Sergey and Eric's words, but they say, we encourage our employees, in addition to their regular projects, to spend 20% of their time working on what they think will most benefit Google. So this is their wild experiment, right? This empowers them to be more creative and innovative. Many of our significant advances have happened in this manner. It worked. And he says, for example, AdSense for content and Google News were both prototyped in 20% time. Most risky projects fizzle, often teaching us something. We'll come back to that thought. others succeed and become attractive businesses. So the idea being that we're going to start small. We're going to start with a test case, if you will, and in this case, the test case is we're giving you 20% of your time to go do that thing, and we know it's probably not going to work out, and that's okay. But we're going to contain it within that 20% of your work week.
Oh yeah, yeah. The such a smart idea. We've talked about this so many times. The people doing the job, the people closest to the customer, know better how to innovate.
That's right.
What's needed and what could be next. So carving out some time for them to work on that, and then creating a culture where we'll go test it.
Yep.
And when you look at these software companies, we don't know it as the end user, but many times they're trying multiple different versions of the same idea, variations on the same idea with multiple different audiences simultaneously.
That's exactly right. And in fact, we learned about that in IDEO. It's a design principle called A/B thinking, A/B testing.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that, like in your example, you've got one or two people willing to pilot this, and we're waiting the right amount of time period to get demonstrable results. And hey, at the end of that time period, you can snap a chalk line and compare pilot to everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? We'll know which one. And sometimes it's taken, to a very formal level. I've been using for a while HubSpot as an email service provider. It's much more than that. And frankly, it's so complicated that I've abandoned it. But had I continued, one of the things built into HubSpot's system is that you could do an A/B test with your emails that you send out. So you could find out if this one worked on half your audience or if this one worked on half your audience. Amazon does it with, movement of buttons around, and they're trying out an experiment on just a certain number of users of their website versus other users. So there are some, very technical ways that it can be done from the perspective of, an email or a website or something that's very electronic, digital that you can measure. But you could do this with anything, right? You could do A/B testing on, how we handle our sales process of people walking in the door, how we handle follow-up calls, how you could do it with anything.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was part of a charitable group, and we had a fundraising letter, and we sent out. I can't remember how many thousand. We had 10 different versions of the letter, and we sent out a few thousand of each version to different people.
You told me about this. This is so cool. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, just to see, right? So the audience was it wasn't like we targeted different audiences. It was just a random cross section of audiences, and in some cases we just the letter was fairly substantially changed. Other cases we just changed a word or two.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, there was just one version of the fundraising letter with just a slight word change that ended up having a huge dramatic effect, right? And in this case, right, we've been kind of talking about this around a little bit. It was measurable.
Yeah.
In this case, the dollars, right? So much more money came back with this one letter that you knew that every letter that went out after that needed to incorporate that verbiage.
Yeah, that's so huge. And you're right, it is the measurable thing is sort of where we're headed with this. And I think there's a temptation, and this is maybe my next point, is beware of success in the short term causing you to abandon the experiment too early. So watch out for, I'll call it scope creep, I guess, right? We've got this pilot going. It seems to be going so well. We'll just keep sending out that one letter, right? Well, we don't know until the experiment's over if it really was demonstrably different.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked with a number of organizations over the years who they're almost proud to say, when we say we've launched a pilot, what that really means is it's the launch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they pay the price, right? Every time they pay the price because it hasn't been all the way thought out. They haven't had consequences happen where they go, oh, we didn't think about that. We better refine our plan a little bit before we get to the full launch.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get to do that. And instead it gets launched and they end up looking foolish a lot of times.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a big issue.
if your pilot is the entire organization is going to now do this
Yeah.
forever, it's
Yeah.
not a pilot.
That's not a pilot. Right.
Right. So yeah, the idea of a subset with a deadline and measurable, yeah, if you're thinking, yeah, do I have a pilot? I'd look for those three things.
I think that is really well said. And and maybe so let's say the three again. A subset,
Yep.
measurable results with a dedicated time period.
Yep.
So I'm going to add a fourth one, and this is my final point, I think. Um, there should be meetings around said end of time period and the data that is the results,
Mm-hmm.
the measurable results. I know that seems really dumb, but I was just talking to somebody. I'm not going to name any names because, like, these are two gigantic companies that are powerhouses. And this individual is an engineer. He went from one powerhouse to this other. You know, they sort of said, ooh, you guys are good at X. Come over and do X for us. And I mean, these are, you know, like, I wouldn't want to use these names because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But when
Right.
he came over to the new company, you know, he said, in my old company, we'd meet in the morning on a pilot run that we're doing of a process, and we'd go over some data, have it on flip charts, and say, okay, this is what's going to happen, right? And we're going to come back at the end of the day and see where the measurements are. And then tomorrow morning, we'll come in and see if there's adjustments to be made at the flip charts. We'll go out and do that, and then come back. And there's this continually revisiting, going back to the data after each round.
Mm-hmm.
That was how it would be done at his old employer. At the new employer, they had a whiteboard. They put some stuff up at the beginning of the week and said, so this is what we're going to do. And all right, everybody get out there. And then that was it. That was the last time they met about it.
Oh
And
yeah.
he was, you know, he was horrified because he was thinking, we'll never get any data out of this, right? We'll never know what worked and what didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So you owe it to yourself if you're going to have an experiment, if you're going to have a pilot, if there's something you're going to test, find out if the test failed or passed, right? You have to do that, and you only get to do that if you have a meeting and look each other in the eye to have that discussion.
Oh yeah, yeah. There has to be, as the military calls it, right, the after action debrief.
That's right.
We've got to have this debrief where we sit down, we look at the data, we collect anecdotal stories, everybody weighs in,
Ooh,
and
good
then
point. Yeah.
we consciously decide, right? Because we promised this at the beginning. We said after 60 days, 90 days,
Yep.
we will sit down, we will evaluate this, and then decide, do we keep moving forward with the pilot, or is this ready to expand to an all-encompassing change for an organization?
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Yeah. So we're collecting not just the data, the quantitative results. We're collecting quantitative information that tells us, like, ooh, there's something to this. This is, you know, there are some stories here that really show we're onto something here. You know, the customers, the employees are really responding to this, or wow, we never would have had a chance to have this kind of impact, and we found out we did because of this thing that happened. Can't really see it on a spreadsheet, but it's worth us talking about.
Oh yeah, yeah. My daughter, she started this job, and she was still trying to figure out the culture,
Yep.
and so they had a big one-off project. It was huge. It was all hands on deck kind of thing, and she was talking like, I really don't know what this company's right, about, and what their culture is. I said, well, here's how you tell. You just had this big event. If at some point soon after this big event, if they have a meeting and ask, all right, what went well, what would we do differently,
Yep.
what were the metrics, right, what were the numbers on this thing, then you've got a learning culture. You've got a
Yeah.
be better at being better culture.
Yep.
If you have this big thing, and it's all encompassing, and you're going to do it again in the future, and after it's over, no one ever talks about it, then
Whoops.
that's not a learning culture. That's just you're going to just be Groundhog Day every time we repeat this experiment again.
Yeah, and I'll this is my final word. I think the danger of that culture is that they only have qualitative data, right? It's the reverse of the other situation we talked about. The stories stick with you. And so if they've heard three nightmare scenarios, they'll say, well, we can't do this ever again. When actually, if they looked at their numbers, sales are up 30% for the customers that experienced that new process that we tested. But they heard about the two or three nightmare scenarios, possibly from an internal employee who was not on board.
Mhm.
My goodness, they're letting that rule the roost because they never decided to have an after action debrief where they really looked at the data after the time period and saw the results. So
Oh
huge,
yeah.
huge, huge opportunities here.
Yeah, yeah. The idea that, yeah, we're going to look at it anecdotally, like you're talking about. We're looking at the metrics, and then we're going to say, are we going to scale it or scrap it?
There it is.
Yeah. Do we go?
That's the question.
We're going to go big, or we're going to go home with this thing.
Yep.
And so the idea, and as you think about this, right, I've seen this done at the micro level.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be sitting down one-on-one with a salesperson, and we'll be talking about things, and he goes, all right, here's what I'm going to do for the next month in my sales presentation. I'm going to try this sentence.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to ask this question. I've never asked this question before. I'm going to add it to my system, and then I'm going to do it for a month and then see what happens. And it's like, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, we kind of been talking about big organizational stuff, but this exact same process could apply to, I'm going to change how I greet somebody, or what my emails that I send out, that if it's a repeating thing, I'm just going to change it, watch it for a month, 2 months, whatever I think is the right time frame to assess the plausibility that it'll make a change, and then I'll evaluate.
And what's so great about that is all the things still apply, right? You still are doing it in a time period. You're still going to measure the results, and you're still going to meet with yourself and decide if you scale it or scrap it. So I love it. Anyway.
Yes, I'm taking the entire team out to lunch to talk about, how that went last month.
Employee of the month.
Me. The idea of, if you want to try something new at work,
yep,
right, propose it as a pilot.
Love it.
And see if we can, just get the chance to try. And the thing that we didn't talk about, that maybe we can wrap this up with, is that failing is good.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, failure is awesome, right?
Yep.
I had somebody the other day, they said, well, what if we do it and it doesn't work? And I went, that would be awesome.
Yes.
They were like, recoiling in horror. What do you mean failure is awesome?
And you say there's a modern patron saint who demonstrates this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You look at SpaceX and Elon Musk and how they've been able to reduce space flights by, the expense by around, I think it's around 80%.
Wow.
He's been able to move faster, quicker in building rockets, launching rockets, putting satellites and people into space. And I was watching this interview with him, and he's like, we love failure.
Yeah.
NASA, on the other hand, did the same thing, but it took them decades to do what they do in just a couple of years.
Yeah.
And it was because NASA, as a government agency, had a culture of everything must be perfect before we go to the next step. And failure's viewed as a waste of taxpayer dollars, and just a loss of faith or face as a nation. Just all this extrapolation to it. And I remember there was a video of Elon, and he was in the SpaceX mission control area. They were launching this new rocket, and a minute into it, the thing just blew up spectacularly all over the screen. And this documentary film crew was filming him, and he starts smiling and nodding his head. He's like, yeah, this is great. And the documentary news guy's like, what are you thinking right now? He goes, man, we just gained so much data.
Yeah.
And we will be able to make so many improvements to the next one. This was a giant leap forward in progress.
That's it.
And they're like, well, what did that cost you? And he's, it's probably $50 million. That was a $50 million, fireworks display.
Which is a great investment from his perspective.
Yeah, which was money well spent
Yep.
to fix everything that was wrong with that one. Make the next one. If it blows up, fine. We'll learn what else is next.
Yep.
And because of failing forward,
Right.
they get better faster.
Yep.
And as long as they learn from their mistakes, which they're really good about, then yeah, we can do it faster, cheaper, and better than anybody else in the planet.
So you will have noticed that the intro audio from Mr. John Wolfe on this episode is a little bit longer. And I chose it on purpose because A, I knew this was going to be a little bit of a shorter episode. And B, I'm completely making this up because it's all done in edit in post. So I can say that that's what I'm going to do because I've now decided that that's what I'm going to do. But the reason I'm doing it
This
is
is time
because
travel.
it's an experiment. He sent us, I think we've got 10 in the can from him that are of various lengths.
Right.
The first one was very long. We couldn't keep using it. He gave us some short ones that are amazing and hilarious. My favorite one is, well, I'd have been against it, but here they are again. I love that one. But then he tried actually an even longer one that involves his ever patient and wonderful wife. And it's a back and forth. And we don't use that one very often because it's super long. I guess you could say that it's an experiment that kind of failed, but it's so funny that occasionally we can trot it out. Today we'll trot it out. So, heck, maybe that's a good place to put a button in this whole thing. Don't be afraid of failure. Try a small experiment, make it for an amount of time, have measurable results at the end, and meet and discuss and decide at that time, are we going to scale it or scrap it? That's sort of the flow of this thing. Anything else?
No, that was absolutely wonderful. And speaking of Mr. Wolfe, we'll throw it over to him, then followed up by a breathtaking, blistering ukulele solo.
It is a failure.
That's not good.
And that's a wrap. It doesn't take a genius. The blog dedicated to reducing the irreducible. Next time, prime numbers. What makes them so special? Join us then. And thanks for listening.
That's good enough.